their past and current work and about the theology around housing. So I will hand it off to Lydia. If you have any questions, please save them for the end since we're a little short on time. But thank you so much for being here.
Can I test something out? Can I yell at you? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Because I'm going to trip over this. Let's be honest about it. Okay. So, my job this morning is to talk a little bit about why we as Christians care. Right? Like we showed up today, this is something that we know that we are supposed to be excited about and engaged in and care about because of our Christian faith. Well, why? So, to take a big step back, we have a God and a tradition that cares deeply about place and about space. If you look at our Bible, it is constantly talking about land, constantly talking about where people are rooted. We have a tradition that when you walk into these buildings, when you walk into our sanctuary, most, if not everything, means something. Our tradition has decided that there is a theological meaning behind so much of what we do when we gather together. And so it makes sense that we have a God that cares deeply about what it means to be home. So today, we're going to talk a little bit about God's dedication to place and home, and God's dedication to us, to human dignity, to the fact that we are creatures created in God's image, and with that come inalienable rights. So before we dig into an understanding of why and what God's dedication to place and home looks like, I'm going to make you talk to each other. You don't have to talk to a stranger if you don't want to, but I highly encourage it. When you think about home, everyone has an idea of what that means. Sometimes it is a positive thing, sometimes it is a complicated thing, but we have a reaction to it. We know what this word means. Take a second, turn to somebody next to you, describe what home feels like. feel safe, spaces that are ours. So when we dig into Scripture, what we see is a constant back and forth, a constant give and take between home and exile. We have a Scripture that is bookended with this idea of home, with this concept of God bringing God's people home. And then we have hundreds of stories in between about what it means to be away from home, what it means to not have a space that is safe, what it means to not have a space that is cozy, a space that you can be yourself in, a place that is yours that you can show up in. So we start this bookend with the Garden of Eden. We all know the story, hopefully, maybe. Where we have this space where everything is provided for us. There is beauty, there is calm, it's everything we need. And then the exile starts. Exile into a world that is complex, that is harsh. There's a lot here that we can unpack about what it means for humans to be a part of that exile or not. That's for another day. We can talk about that later if you want. But this idea that we are taken from the place of complete safety and invited out into a world where we have to grapple with really hard things. A world that is not always safe. A world that is really complex. We see this continue in so many ways, but the next place we're going to jump to is Moses. One of the most obvious understandings of exile that we have in our Hebrew Bible, Moses and the Israelites spent 40 years wandering. 40 years out in the desert, searching for home. And the thing is that home is promised. Right? God has said, you have a place. It is a physical place. It is a thing that I am giving you. You're going there, I promise. As Moses leads his people, we have this covenant that they're not doing it in vain. That they're not just sort of there or having some sort of terrible trick played on them, right? And so as we transition into, I'm jumping over a lot of scripture here, so watch out. As we transition into the New Testament, home turns from this place, right, this land, into God, into a conversation about what it looks like to be in relationship with God in the kingdom. And so, as we get into the ministry of Jesus, we have this idea that our home is both a land, right? It is both a place and a thing that is promised to us by God, but it is also all of these things that you have talked about, right? When you said when you described home, it is also about the way that we are able to be safe, the way that we are able to be in relationship, the way that we are called deeper into God's love by having a place that is ours. And so we see this in a few ways, but I want to read for you a passage from Revelation, which is the ultimate understanding of home, right? It's the other bookend. I've skipped over a lot of really good stories, but so we go from Adam and Eve have the Garden of Eden, have this particular space, to Revelation. I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "See, the home of God is among mortals. He will dwell with them, they will be his peoples, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Mourning and crying and pain will be no more, for the first things have passed away. Home is so much more complex than that one particular place. God is bursting open this idea that there is more to home, there is more to housing than the house. We don't care about this because it's structured. We care about this because we are here. Which then gets to God caring about us, right? Why does God care so much about the land? Why does God care so much about this idea of God dwelling among us? Because God cares about us. The dedication to human dignity and to human pride. And this is one of the hardest things that I have grappled with in my theological understanding, but I think it is one of the most important, and especially when we talk about justice issues. God doesn't love us because we deserve it. God doesn't love it because we did something to make God love us. We are lovable simply because we are. And so, as humans that are created in God's own image, that comes with this love. That comes with what we think of as the rights of existence. Inalienable human rights. And so, as we go through the next sort of 3 parts of this series, 2.5 parts of this series, that is where we are grounded. We are grounded as a people that have traditionally cared about what it means to be home, what it means to be in these spaces. But more than that, we care about it because we are beloved of God. Period, hard stop. And so, as we think about what it means to have human rights, what it means for there to be justice in our world, that's the place where we ground. That's the place where we start. Because home is destined for us not because we did anything to deserve it, but because we are humans who are loved. And that love gives us the right to safety. It gives us the right to security. It gives us the right to the peace that comes with being home. So now we're going to talk about what we do with that. If that is a right, that is who we are as beloved creatures of God, how do we show up? I'm going to stop now.
Hi, I'm Ron Gadden. Most of you know me. I know most of you. I've been coming here since 1977. So I'm better and fortunate to meet my wife here for the first time. Anyhow, most of you have probably heard or are familiar with St. Edmund's Episcopal Church at 61st in Michigan. It was a well-established church in the black community, but as the neighborhood around St. Edmund's changed, the church found itself in a difficult situation. In 1989, they called the director, Richard Tolliver. He looked at the situation around and said, we are at this point primarily a commuter congregation, and if we can't do anything to change the neighborhood around the church, people are going to stop commuting here because it was ugly, it was dangerous, and it was just generally not a joyful place to be. Washington Park at that point was one of the poorest and most violent neighborhoods in the city. We have a short video here that talks about what St. Edmund's has done, and so we'll start with that, and then Leslie and I will talk for a little more.
Where faith meets works. For as the body without the spirit is dead, dead. So faith without works is dead also.
Faith is the initial reason. Faith in Jesus Christ and the desire to be a faithful witness for Him through concrete actions.
Quite clear, it says faith without works is dead. You might have it, but what does it mean? And the way to see what it means is how it shapes your choices and your activities and your advocacy in this world.
Faith is alive and working in St. Edmund's Episcopal Church through the St. Edmund's Redevelopment Corporation, also known as CERC. CERC was founded in 1990 by St. Edmund's, the Reverend Dr. Richard Tolliver, to serve as a catalyst for the revitalization of the Washington Park neighborhood's deteriorating housing stock and pressing community needs caused by public and private disinvestment and the resulting demographic trends.
The first CERC project was the purchase and rehabilitation of a 16-unit apartment building that had been vacant so long that no one had any memory of how long it had been abandoned.
The first time you do anything is always a challenge. We had particular challenges because as being both church-based and not having any experience, it was very difficult to find a lender who was willing to do business with us.
As CERC expanded its revitalization activities, attracting funding for both development activities and ongoing operations was a constant challenge.
There have always been funding challenges, both on the development side and on the operational side.
We have, at this point, achieved the investment of more than $100 million of private investment and government investment in the neighborhood. But it has been very challenging and continues to be that way.
The Chicago Community Home Fund is especially proud to partner with the St. Edmund's Redevelopment Corporation because we were created 27 years ago by founding directors who wanted the Chicago Community Home Fund to have a special role in supporting the development activities of grassroots neighborhood development organizations like St. Edmund's.
True to its mission, St. Edmund's Redevelopment Corporation has transformed Washington Park.
CERC currently owns 731 units in 34 different buildings. One of the things I insist on when we build new properties is that none of them have a project look.
Reverend Tolliver works very hard to see that the product that we're developing is one that everybody can be proud of.
St. Edmund's Oasis is designed to be a very attractive facility that anybody would want to live in, both from the exterior curb appeal and in terms of the interior design and amenities.
I like living in St. Edmund's Oasis because they have a lot of amenities. I love the space. And I love that they have like an upstairs and downstairs and give it a house kind of feel.
CERC has recognized that for revitalization to occur, both the perception and reality of improved security is essential.
We've ensured the safety of St. Edmunds residents through a variety of mechanisms.
Well, St. Edmunds has been a great resource and a great partner with the City of Chicago, the Police Department, and the City of Chicago itself. What we've done is we've incorporated our camera system, integrated our camera system with their camera system so we can kind of build our crime strategy around their problems so we can have a safer community.
I think the importance of St. Edmund's Redevelopment Corporation is that it shows what can be done when one person, one church, refuses to accept the status quo.
One of the exciting things that keeps me going is the positive feedback I get from residents who tell me how happy they are to live in housing provided by St. Edmunds. So that really makes me say that we must be doing something that's enhancing the quality of life for people who live in our communities.
It is fair to say that the activities of CERC to revitalize the neighborhood have also served to revitalize St. Edmund's Church itself and stand as living witness to the scripture.
So let me be clear about one thing, the relationship of St. Edmunds Redevelopment Corporation to the church itself. The church itself is neither the owner nor the developer of this housing for several reasons, one of which is the general prohibition against using public funds to go into religious organizations. So they formed a nonprofit corporation, and that corporation has done the work that Reverend Oliver was speaking of there, and it is composed largely of people who were in St. Edmund's congregation, but also a few outside experts and neighborhood people as well. I'm going to talk for a couple minutes, and then I'm going to let Leslie talk for a couple minutes. Let me start by saying, as Lydia said, housing is complicated. It is complicated financially, it is complicated socially, and it's complicated legally. Financially, you heard the numbers there. We have had to attract more than $105 million to build or rehab 700 units. That's in 14 different developments. Each of those is a challenge. It involves working with the federal government, the city government, the state government, private lenders, equity investors, etc. It is very complicated and difficult, and it's important that well, at one time when I first met Reverend Towler, I was serving as chairman of the Diocese Affordable Housing Task Force, and I visited a lot of churches to try to interest people in housing, and the only one that ever took the bait was St. Edmunds. The best way I can explain it is vestries in churches are frequently used to spending hours debating whether they should buy a new refrigerator and then when all of a sudden you move into millions, tens of millions of dollars, it's a whole different ballgame. But anyhow, it's complicated financially. It's complicated socially. And I just want to repeat something that Lydia said, because it's sort of our mantra. Housing is a lot more than shelter. If you are just in the business of providing shelter, you're going to have a difficult time and you're going to miss the point. If it were about only shelter, the high-rise public housing projects of the Chicago Housing Authority would have been quite successful. They didn't fail because they provided inadequate shelter. They failed because of the social climate that came to exist in the building, which made maintenance of that shelter and life there extremely difficult. One of the things we did at one point in St. Edmunds, we had about 800 school-age kids, and more than that anyhow. So we did a survey of where they went to school. We found out that they went to 30 different grade schools and 19 different high schools. If you think about communities, you think of the fact that the churches and the schools have traditionally been the glue that held neighborhoods together. We have now fractured the school system so that it is no longer a place where people, where communities can come together. And our churches are no longer neighborhood based. There are some, we still have a neighborhood element here, a substantial one, but most churches don't, frankly. So the two kind of pieces that have traditionally held neighborhoods together are no longer doing it. And the result has been very dramatically problematic for the communities themselves. We at St. Edmunds have had to work very hard on the security side of things. We now have 24 square blocks in and around the parish that are under video camera protection. And not a week goes by that we don't entertain the police coming in to look at videos and see what's happening. Most recently, the kids who were, or the kid and was killed and others wounded on Prairie Avenue and 57th Street, we were able to pick up, the vehicle that followed the car that shot them up and so on and so forth. We do things like that all the time. There are people who don't like surveillance, but security is a critical issue to housing and feeling safe in your home. Our people who run these developments, I think, are the closest thing to government that exists in the neighborhood. They see conflicts that are developing domestically and try to direct people towards resources. They see kids, who are getting into conflict. They, Leslie can tell you more, we are the reading service for probably about a third of the population that is illiterate. So our managers spend a lot of time simply reading mail to the tenants who are there. And we generally provide all kinds of services, directing people towards employment opportunities, social services, so on and so forth. We are like a government for the people who live in our developments. It's not something that when we first started getting into this business, we didn't think of becoming a surrogate government for the city of Chicago. That's what you wind up doing if you're trying to create a place that gives people the opportunity to be safe and to recognize their potential. But let me last get to the question legally, because when I first heard about this effort and housing justice, my first reaction was to think, well, here we go. Because probably no area runs into as much conflict between individual rights and community rights as a building, as housing does. We frequently find ourselves, frankly, in court, squared off against legal aid attorneys who are protecting, in those eviction courts, people who have terrorized their neighborhoods, sell drugs to the neighbors, so on and so forth. So please don't think that housing justice is simply defending people who can't live well with their neighborhoods. People have a right in our buildings to be safe, not be terrorized. And that gets us into some very difficult positions at times. I will invite you at the end to take a look at these. Every yellow dot there that you see represents the St. Edmunds project. This is St. Edmunds down here. Those include things like we rehabbed 20 vacant and abandoned buildings, creating over 258 units. We built 204 units on vacant city-owned property. And what was our either most successful or craziest exploit, we took over the management of a 24-story, 230-unit building, which HUD called its worst building on the south side of Chicago.
We don't own it anymore. We don't manage it anymore.
But we took it over and turned it from a place that terrorized the neighborhood into a place that really was an asset to the community. But we did that with a lot of cooperation with the Chicago Police department, but also with the fact that me and my daughter Sophia, and several people who work for us every Saturday in the summer would have 3-on-3 basketball games in the parking lot and back, so on and so forth. So I will just say that, remind you once again, housing is very complicated financially, socially, and legally. And Leslie's been on the front lines here. Leslie, actually, I should say that we develop and own ourselves besides St. Edmunds. Leslie has developed the largest project ever done by an African-American woman in the city of Chicago, 65 units over 10 vacant city lots over on Indiana. So she's been there, done that.
Yeah, I'm still recovering from that lobotomy. The closing happened in 2002. Project got completed and done. Construction was done in 2004, I believe. And as Ron was saying, these transactions are very complicated. They are very multifaceted. They are extremely heavily layered with lots of financing sources. And it was one of those experiences that I have chosen not to repeat again. However, I don't know what, almost 20 years later, the good news is the buildings are still standing. The one thing that I take a lot of pride out of with constructing Indiana Manor, that's the name of the development, Indiana Manor Townhomes. It's located on, as Ron said, 10 parcels stretched between 4900 South Indiana to as far north as 4300 South Indiana. When this development was built, we weren't able to take all of the vacant city land and create a footprint where everything could be right next to each other, which then meant once our lovely buildings were constructed, we had vacant land next to it. 20 years later, there are, single-family homes that are selling for $400,000, upwards. I mean, in terms of true neighborhood revitalization, I think that project really did help to jumpstart that movement. The other thing that I would just sort of add, and I'm not going to say much more, is the way that I got brought into St. Edmunds Redevelopment Corporation. So Ron was actually hired as their development consultant. And one of the things that they found early on, as they completed a lot of their earlier developments, they actually did a lot of third-party property management, which means they contracted it out to other management companies. And what they found was that the management companies really weren't doing as good of a job managing properties, right? And so if you're gonna lose money, let me at least take an opportunity to see if I can do it better. And so St. Edmunds approached HUD to go in and say, we'd like to self-manage. And at the time, St. Edmunds really didn't have as large of a portfolio, and they also didn't have any actual property management experience. And so what they made them do was to go out and find a partner to come in and join the ownership structure, and that was my role at the time. And we created a management company titled Gilead Management in 2004, I think, 2005 is when we created Gilead Management, which allowed us to be able, and St. Edmunds, to be able to take on the property management of all of their buildings in their portfolio. We are still managing. I have lots of headaches. I've always said property management is sort of like next to being a physician, because your phone still rings in the middle of the night. It doesn't matter. But anyhow, I don't think I have much more to add except to say that, Lydia's comment about housing being complicated I have stories that I could just tell you that are just make you just your jaw drop. Let's just put it there. So, sure.
We're talking about the rehab of old zoning.
No, it's about half and half. Half
Well-
rehabs and new construction.
Are they gutting the building or redoing it?
Yes.
What kind of building, in the street, in the north side, you got the hospital building, what kind of building are the best kind of buildings to take?
When I try to pick a building to rehab, I try to pick a building that I can envision becoming a community asset. So if there's a building that's vacant in the middle of the block, that's all vacant, that's not what I'm looking for. The structure's not really so much vacant. You can pretty much rehab anything except the wood frame. I mean, you can do that too. So the real question, location is what's going to happen.
Thank you so much, all. It is time to let the kids in, but please keep the conversation going.
Yes, we will, if you'd like to ask questions of the speakers, maybe come up in front of here, and then the parents and kids, can go along their way. But just before we start the Q&A, just for everyone else who needs to leave, thank you so much for coming. We encourage you to join us for part 2 and part 3 the following Sundays. And if you want to learn more about the Faith in Action team, come up and see me, and we can exchange emails, and I can tell you more. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
I woke up early too, but it's somehow. It's enough.